Hey guys, welcome back to the Base Brief. This week we're talking about the Biden administration saying there's no signs of recession, Twitter bans the term groomer, but not actual groomers, climate activists are becoming even more extreme, and a right-wing Karen melts down at a Petsmart. Let's jump in. Alright, we got a huge lineup today. I'm excited to talk about all this.
Yeah, no shortage of things to discuss, but how's the recovery from COVID going?
You know, I don't usually cuss, but I have no other way to say it. It's been a real bitch, and I basically felt like hell for a couple of days with COVID, kind of thought I was coming out of it, traveled to New York City, that really took the wind out of me, and then I got really sick again, and I went into the doctor's office, and I have bronchitis, so I'm now on Yeah, great. But the funny thing is, now that I tested negative for COVID and have bronchitis, I actually got meds. Whereas the first time around, they literally wouldn't give me any meds. When I had COVID, I was like, can I have a Z-Pack, an inhaler, like literally anything? And they were like, yeah, no, we can call in like a cough syrup for you, which I thought was super odd. And even this time around, when I went to the doctor, they said, they gave me like an antibiotic and they gave me an inhaler and they gave me like a cough syrup, but they said I had to wait for my negative test before they give me a steroid. And then once it was negative, I could have a steroid, which I don't understand COVID treatments at all. The whole experience has been really weird. And like, honestly, it might be compassion fatigue, but all of the healthcare providers I've interacted with throughout this whole ordeal have been not that nice. Like, I really wasn't doing well. I had a pretty hard bout with this. I think I had COVID one other time and like it sucked, but I was fine within like 3 days. I think you remember I was like back up on the 4th day and writing. I was good. This time around, like it really knocked the wind out of my sails, but the practitioners would be like, well, you're young, you're healthy, you're vaccinated, so no need to be concerned. And I was like, no, I have 103-degree fever that won't break. That is like ER level territory. Yeah, like that's not normal. And yeah, just very dismissive and like, I really was not impressed at all. And they kind of had this idea of like, well, if you're vaccinated, you're fine. I'm like, but I'm clearly not fine. So like, doesn't track.
Yeah,
but
I guess
anyways.
not. I mean, I think it's safe to say that you were never in danger of dying, but that doesn't mean they should just dismiss that you were going through serious symptoms. I've heard from a couple people who were young and healthy that had a real rough time with it. But I think, that might be just the case. It might just be here to stay. We might just get COVID every year or two for the rest of our lives.
In which case, like, make people comfortable like you would with any other illness, like the flu or a bad cold. Like, give people medicines, but it seems to be like the whole sort of healthcare regime has just hung their hat on these vaccines, which I'm thankful for the vaccines. I'm especially thankful for them for older people and people with prior existing conditions. But to act like, well, you had the vaccine, so you're fine, that's obviously not the case. People are still getting bad cases of COVID and dealing with this. And
there are treatments they can give. Maybe they just didn't think you were extreme enough to warrant them, but it sounds like you were kind of extreme. I don't know. I don't know the specifics of all the medicine. I'm just glad that you're feeling better. Over here, I just did something that I don't normally do. I just put up my first yard sign, political yard sign ever. And so I'm getting involved in local politics a little bit. So my congressman here in Grand Rapids, where we moved, is Peter Meyer. And we're not going to get into this because we don't endorse any candidates or get involved in any elections at all. But in my personal private capacity as a citizen, not affiliated with base politics in any way, I am rather frustrated because I'm observing that the Democratic Congressional Committee, the National Democrats, just poured $425 million into supporting a Trump-endorsed Republican primary challenger who says that it is mathematically impossible that Trump lost in 2020 that is challenging Peter Meyer, who acknowledged the reality of the election and did not go along with that. And this is all very matter of fact. You can read about it in the New York Times today. And it's very frustrating to me because I do care about democracy. And to see Democrats literally funding and endorsing a candidate that is on the record with views not like their own just because they think they'll have a better chance of beating that candidate in a general election. To me, it's everything that's wrong with our politics. And so there's now a yard sign in my front yard encouraging people to vote a certain way on August 2nd.
You know, it's interesting. I can't say with 100% certainty, but I believe the way I first discovered Justin Amash, who used to have the seat in your district, was in the 2014 election. He got primaried really hard by another quote Republican who was by no means like a better choice than Justin Amash. And I believe Democrats did the same thing then. Certainly Republicans worked to primary him too. But Democrats were also pouring in on that. And I guess that's something you probably see more often in purple kind of districts. But it is really frustrating. And I've observed a little bit of that both in Nashville and now in Atlanta, because I've lived in pretty purple cities most of my adult life. And not only do I see that happening, but a lot of Democrats will actually cross over and vote in primary elections to try to get like a fringier sort of candidate that they think will be easier to beat in general elections.
Some here are actually planning on crossing over and voting for Meyer in the open primary because they say they want to hedge their bets. And so that if they do lose, they'll have somebody who at least isn't, anti-democracy. That's what they say. And I think that is a much more logically consistent and principled way to approach it than actually going and supporting the worst of your opponents in your view. But it's interesting because my boyfriend and I were having this conversation. We were at a campaign event last night in our private capacity at a local bar. And we were talking about this because I've always kind of thought about running for office one day or getting involved. And I think we both agree that I would be a very good lawmaker. I would be very good at drafting legislation, at seriously considering my votes. At the actual nuts and bolts of governing or lawmaking, I think I'd be quite good. But I don't know that I have it cut out to be a politician, right? I'm just so not a people person in the idea of night after night, working a room, smiling and waving, introducing to every person, meeting with all these special interest groups. And so what I said was my dream scenario is that a Senate seat or something comes open once I'm 40 and I made it big and I'm really well known and established in my career, and a governor appoints me, so I don't have to run, and then I serve one term and don't run for re-election and just do the work. That would be my dream.
I have to pop your balloon a little bit even on that, which is why I've decided I no longer want to run for office. And I would have hated the actual campaigning. I knew that, not because I'm not a people person, just because I have a hard time not saying exactly what I think. And so that part would be really tough for me. But actually, it's what Justin Amash has said over and over. It's like, even once you go through all that and you get there, the amount of actual legislating you get to do outside of being one of the people in leadership, which means you have to be there for decades and toe that party line for quite some time, is very minimal.
It's better in the Senate than the House, though. He's talking about the House, and the Senate is still broken, but it's not as broken. And also, I would be very effective like Senator Paul does. He doesn't pass a ton of bills. He passes some, but he uses the bully pulpit to enormous effect. And I think if I was a senator, I would be in the media all the time with op-eds and on cable, and I would be pushing a message in a direction, and I think I'd be good at that. I agree, though, that realistically, you're not going to get that much legislation passed. But it's just interesting stuff to consider for the future. But not anytime soon.
It's hard to argue that anybody has had more influence than Senator Rand Paul in the past couple of years. I mean, really, if you look at since he became a senator, where the GOP has moved on things like foreign policy and civil liberties, even to some degree, I think that is largely thanks to his influence on the culture and using the bully pulpit in an effective way. And I think that does have value. So if you're willing to go through all the other crud to get to that point, then yes, I agree, you'd be very, very good at that. And at the very least, Brad, I think we could say that you would not gaslight the American people should you get that opportunity, and try to tell them that the things that they are experiencing, their lived reality, the dollars in their bank account are not what they think they are, as we see from many of the current politicians with their bully pulpits, specifically within the Joe Biden administration, because it has been a doozy of a week on this front. They basically are trying to tell us that there are no signs of a recession. Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, literally said there's no signs of a recession. Everything's hunky-dory. It's going great, guys. The economy's strong. They are literally running with this narrative. And I've seen some, political maneuvering in my time. I've seen politicians try to flip things and put spin on it. But this is a level that's actually new even to me, where they're taking it right now.
Yeah, I just don't understand how with gas prices this high right now, they can afford to keep gaslighting us time and time again on the economy. But it's like, I think it's, what is it, 1984, where it's like, how many fingers am I holding up? And he's holding up 5 fingers, but he's demanding that you say 4, and they keep demanding it until you say 4. It's like, nothing to see here, folks. Now, the important context folks need to be aware of is that informally, not technically, but the traditional definition of a recession that's always been used in politics and the media is when you have 2 quarters in a row where the economy is shrinking and decreasing, not growing. The national gross domestic product, the amount of stuff we build and make in a year, is actually getting smaller, not bigger, for 2 quarters in a row. And that's about to happen, basically. Last quarter was already significantly negative growth, and then on Thursday, the next quarter comes out, the data, and it's expected to be significantly in the red as well, which would mean that by all traditional accounts, people would start to informally say we're in a recession. The White House is trying to get ahead of that, and they're coming out this week saying, actually, that's not what a recession is anymore. So let me read you this thread from the White House Council of Economic Advisors, their statement. While some maintain that 2 consecutive quarters of falling real GDP constitute a recession, that is neither the official definition nor the way economists evaluate the state of the business cycle. Instead, both official determinations of recessions and economists' assessment of economic activity are based on a holistic look at the data. And based on these data, it is unlikely that the decline in GDP in the first quarter of this year, even if followed by another GDP decline in the second quarter, indicates a recession. And they point out that the National Bureau of Economic Research, which is not a government body, is an academic body, does not define it with this 2 quarters rule, but defines a recession as a significant decline in economic activity that is spread across the economy and that lasts more than a few months. I'll just say, Hannah, that my BS alarm is going off all over the place. My political spin alarm. Was this a red flag for you, this preemptive spin?
Yeah, well, I certainly think when it comes to their messaging, which they're talking to the average American citizen right now, I think they know that most people are not super adept at economics, and they know that probably the average American doesn't really know what quantifies as a recession. And so they're taking this opportunity to try to spin things. I do think it's disingenuous. Traditionally, in the media, in most political dialogue, we have defined a recession as 2 quarters of this type of slowed growth.
And sorry to interrupt, but just real quick, actually, multiple federal laws Phil Magnus, an economic historian, pointed this out on Twitter. Multiple federal laws use the 2 quarters definition of a recession to trigger special budgetary and economic policies in federal law. So this is not just some shorthand. It's a pretty established thing.
Yes. And yes, you could get into, and we will for a minute here, you can get into the other factors that economists often consider when evaluating the overall health of an economy. And it is true that there are some good indications in our economy right now. Not everything is bad. For one example, you do still have strong job growth, a good job market for people. That's very good for workers. That gives them a lot more power to negotiate their salaries. That being said, though, we've seen wages stagnate. We see that people are losing money both in their savings and in their income. And as a whole, when you look at the reality of the economy, I think the average American, whether or not they've ever taken an econ class or not, knows that things are not good and that we are kind of on the precipice of a cliff. Everybody knows things are not looking good. The stock market's not looking good.
Your 401k.
401k. Oh my gosh, I had a meeting with my investment advisor this week, and he was, very apologetic. He's like, there's only so much we can do. You're down 13.1%. And, I'm still young, so that's fine. I'll make that up over time. But, people like my parents who are approaching retirement, that's not the case for them. These are really big deals that have a long-term impact on people's retirement and their savings. And I'm more fortunate than most. Some people's are down 19, 20% over time. So these are things that really, I think the American people are not going to respond well to, because you can only tell people that their lived experience isn't actually reality for so long until they rebel. And the reality is people are still spending a ton of money at the gas tank. People's grocery bills are through the roof. The price of meat is outrageous. And as a whole, people are having to cut back. They're making decisions based on how they're experiencing the economy right now. And so for this administration to run around saying there's no signs of a recession, we're going to change the traditional definition of what a recession is, it's frankly offensive. And it says to me they have not only no plan to get this under control, no actual desire to seek real outcomes that would better the lives of the American people, but they're going to do the next offensive thing, which is to lie to you and to tell you that this isn't actually happening to you. So I'm mad about it.
I've always said that I think the Biden administration would fare better. To me, their current approach is like that meme of this little yellow dog inside a room that's on fire, and the caption just says, "This is fine," and he's like staring blank-faced at the camera. That's kind of what I get from the Biden administration right now. Like, this is fine, nothing to see here, as inflation is surging, the economy is shrinking, people's real wages, once you account for inflation, have decreased by something like 5% over the last year. I don't have the exact number in front of me, but they've gone down significantly. The unemployment rate, like you mentioned, is low. That is good. But there's also still a lot of workers on the sidelines. And the unemployment rate only counts folks who are looking for work. So people who've dropped out of the labor force aren't captured in that. The job numbers are strong, yes. But inflation, stocks, investments, our beloved crypto, lots of things aren't looking so hot right now. And polls overwhelmingly show that the vast majority of the public doesn't think the economy is doing well, doesn't think the country's on the right track. And I think the Biden administration would be better served by acknowledging that reality, acknowledging their pain, and saying, we're doing our best. And maybe even like blaming other people and saying, Republicans won't work with us to get your bills down or whatever, even if that's not true. Just say that, but don't deny the pain they're experiencing. I think Americans are going to really hate that and really punish the Democrats for that, because that really pisses people off when you tell them, no, you're not getting poorer. No, your wallet's not being stretched further. Everything is fine. We're doing wonderful. Like, you're much better off just acknowledging people's pain, I think.
Yeah, well, you and I do some work with Americans for Prosperity on the side, and they've been doing these events across the country that you actually got to drop in on one, guys. If you haven't seen Brad's YouTube material from this event, you've got to go check it out because it's so moving. But they're doing these events where they reduce the cost of gas to the price it was the day Biden took office, which was like, I think, $2.30 or something in that range. $2.38. And basically they offer, you have to get there really early and people line up and they have to cap it a certain number of people, but they let people fill up their gas tanks for that amount of money that day and are subsidizing that. And they're doing that to kind of prove a point and talk to the average American and how this is actually impacting them. And this is one thing I've said for so long. I just get so mad at these like uppity leftists that are constantly trying to say that people like you and I who are concerned with things like federal spending and the Federal Reserve and the price of gas are just these money-hungry capitalists who only care about our bank accounts. And it's like, that is so short-sighted. I care about these things because I know how they impact real people. I remember being somebody who had to budget out my salary and figure out how I was going to work some days because of the price of gas under Obama. I remember that being really hard for me. And so I know very well what those struggles day to day look like for people. And for many of these people, they're on fixed incomes, they have children, they have elderly parents they're caring for. These aren't small things. And so to diminish that experience and to basically tell people it's not as bad as they think it is offensive. It is harmful. And it's something that I think is really corrupt in our governmental system. And it's something that, like, I do blame both sides for some of the money issues we face, but when it comes to things like this, the left continues to double down on the policies that have created this mess and will never take accountability for it, will never, ever admit how their policies hurt people, and I'm fed up by it.
So the gaslighting continues, even onto the issue of gas prices themselves. President Biden, from the POTUS account, which, gosh, the feed is exhausting to keep up with, tweeted out recently, gas prices have declined by an average of 60 cents per gallon over the past 38 days. 5 straight weeks of gas prices coming down. And I just have to laugh, because as of today, the national average of gas prices nationwide is $4.32, according to AAA. And you're out here bragging about gas prices? When it's over $4 gas, it's like, oh my goodness, Uncle Joe does not know how to read the room.
Honestly, this reminds me of when they shut the economy down via lockdowns, put tons of people out of work, eliminated tons of jobs, and they were like, we just created more jobs than any of the past administrations. It's like, that's not how math works. Like, that's not how that works. Same concept here. And they just, it's like those men, you don't experience this probably, maybe you do, those men that just mass ping women on the internet and DMs. You're like, who's responding to this? But you know it's a numbers game, and I guess some people are responding to it or they wouldn't keep trying it. That's the vibes I get from this administration, where they just keep trying to like spin the numbers and spin the definitions and think that, you know, people won't notice or won't pick up on it. And I guess for a certain amount of people in the country, it must be true. It must be working for them somehow, because they keep trying this angle.
Yeah, I think they have to make up their minds. President Biden just a hot minute ago was telling us gas prices aren't in my control. It's all Putin's price hike because of the invasion of Ukraine. But now that they're down 60 cents and still over $4, by the way, he's trying to take credit for that on Twitter. And to me, you got to have it one way or the other. You can't take credit and then also dodge blame. I've been pretty consistent on this. I think his policies have made gas prices worse, and they did rise by over $1 before the invasion. But I've also always acknowledged there are lots of things that influence gas prices. It's not just a president. The war in Ukraine, global markets, OPEC, lots of things go into it. But he seems to want it the best of both worlds. Actually, Donald Trump did something similar when he was president. He would always tweet about how amazing the stock market was doing when it set new records. But then when it dived or went down, he would not take credit. And I'm like, I don't really think the stock market is 100% dependent on any president. But if you take credit for the wins, you've got to take credit for the losses. And in the inverse, Biden can't take credit for a 60-cent decrease in gas prices, which it's cringe. I mean, it's still really expensive. But you can't, unless you're also going to acknowledge blame for the high prices, which he has yet to do. So maybe, I guess I feel like they're just throwing crap at the wall to see what sticks, what narrative could possibly bury their trash approval ratings. But I don't think that this is going to work.
This is like the meme of the three people winning medals, the Olympic kind of podium, first place, second place, third place, and the guy in third place is like just flashing himself with a champagne bottle celebrating, and it's like, sir, calm down. So yeah, I agree with you. You've got to pick a lane here. All right, well, things are heating up in the climate change battle in this country. And no, I don't just mean the allegedly record high temperatures we've been experiencing across the globe lately. I mean the crazy extremes some activists are going to lately to shove their agenda through. So I want to call people's attention to a few incidents recently. There's been a lot of buzz circulating that Biden might soon step in and push through an emergency climate executive order and basically try to activate emergency powers, similar to what we saw many politicians do with COVID, right? They used this public health emergency kind of claim to take outrageous powers they in no way had or could have gotten through Congress. There's been a lot of concern they might try the same approach with climate issues. But last Wednesday, while Biden didn't declare a climate national emergency, as many of the activists were hoping that he would, he did strongly suggest he would do so soon. Let's roll that clip.
You all have a duty right now to our economy, to our competitiveness in the world, to the young people in this nation, and to future generations. That sounds like hyperbole, but it's not. It's real. To act boldly on climate. And so does Congress, which, notwithstanding the leadership of the men and women that are here today, has failed in this duty. Not a single Republican in Congress stepped up to support my climate plan. Not one. So let me be clear. Climate change is an emergency. And in the coming weeks, I'm going to use the power I have as president to turn these words into formal, official government actions through the appropriate proclamations, executive orders, and regulatory power that a president possesses.
So, Brad, first and foremost, I guess where I want to start is, how big of a threat do you think this is? Do you think we're going to see them do this kind of power grab?
I think it may well happen because Biden has already issued several executive orders. And if he wants to keep going, he has to have emergency authorization because there's only so much he can do without it. And it would unlock the ability to unilaterally spend money and do some other things that's probably very appealing to him. But the thing that's crazy about this to me is that he's openly admitting, you just heard him say in that clip, Republicans won't vote for this. What he's saying is, I've tried to pass climate legislation. Set aside for a moment the debate over whether that's good or bad legislation. Congress has decided not to pass it. They've not voted for it. I haven't been able to obtain a majority support in both houses of Congress. So I'm just going to try to do it without them through executive orders, through emergencies or whatever. That is clearly an attempt to circumvent the separation of powers, the limits on the Constitution, because if you actually had the authority to do it unilaterally, why didn't you do that in the first place, Joe? Right? You wouldn't have gone to Congress, hat in hand, and tried to negotiate it if you actually had the lawful authority to just do this stuff yourself. But it's kind of like Obama did this, and actually, to be consistent, Donald Trump did this. He couldn't get Congress to pass his border wall that he wanted, even though he tried multiple times. So he declared a border emergency and then tried to unilaterally redirect military and emergency funding to build a wall. And the court slapped him down and said, you can't do that. And many Republicans who actually have integrity at the time said, look, I think the border's a problem. I support the wall, but you can't do it this way because this will set the stage for a climate emergency or a student debt emergency or whatever the Democrats do next. And that's what we're seeing now with Biden. My only hope is that it will be slapped down by the courts because it is not constitutional. It is absolutely him trying to circumvent the bounds of his proper power. And I think it's really concerning.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, he essentially admits, I can't get this passed because half the country doesn't want it, right? And this is the big overarching problem with the expansion of power in the executive branch and the failure of both the courts and the legislature to step in and act as a check and balance on that. The president was never supposed to have the power of the pen for these kinds of large, overarching kinds of policy agendas. They were supposed to have executive orders, basically symbolically, right? To like sign medals for people or honors for people and those kinds of things. It was not supposed to be used in this way. But we have, over the past couple of decades, seen a tremendous increase in how many executive orders are being used. I think you have a great piece actually this week that's about more of the regulations under the Biden administration as a whole, but in there you talk about how much he's been using the power of the pen. And I had a friend ask me the other day,
he's actually, just from that piece, according to the Foundation for Government Accountability, Biden has put more regulations in place in his first year, 4 times more than Obama did in his first year. So even by Democratic standards, this is not business as usual. This is an administration who can't get their way democratically, so who's trying to just do it with the pen and phone.
Yeah, but we've seen an increase. I feel like it started with W to really ramp up, and then Obama just took it next level crazy. And I remember Obama's presidency, we were all sort of aghast and shocked at how he was doing that. And he even kind of famously said that he used the power of the pen and the phone that he had. So he really was the one that first kind of just totally thwart any idea of checks and balances on his power. Trump then came in and did the exact same thing. You have to call that out as well. And now Biden really is excessively using that power. So we really do need to see the other branches of government step in as a check and balance on this. I think it's highly concerning. And again, even if you like it for one agenda item, it can certainly be used for many others that you're not going to like. This isn't how things are supposed to get done in this country.
But why is he doing it, right? He's doing it because he's caving to these radical activists who are really ramping up the pressure.
Well, yeah, and I want to give a few examples of that because we really have seen the pressure get piled on in the past couple of years. A lot of heat coming down on both Joe Biden and Senator Joe Manchin, who often is the holdout vote for them in the Senate on some of their more aggressive plans. But these people have very, very big green agendas. And to be clear, like I think you could garner support for some climate change policy that the right could get on board with, right? But they're not trying to have those conversations. They're not trying to talk about nuclear. They're not trying to talk about actual free market alternatives. They're trying to talk about really radical agendas that would decrease the quality of life for all Americans, that would make things vastly more expensive. It's been touted that like many in the Biden administration don't see gas prices as that big of an issue because ultimately they want to push everybody into electric vehicles and they're fine with temporary pain for average working Americans if that gets them to their ultimate outcome. So I want to be clear when we're talking about these protesters, I believe that climate change is a problem. I believe that there are solutions that we should be active on, and I think there's ways that you could
cough, nuclear power, cough.
Nuclear power. There's ways you could do this. They're not actually trying to have a conversation. They're not actually coming to the table. They're kind of just holding the country hostage and saying our way or the highway. And a few examples of that over the past week on Twitter, I saw signs that are being posted all over Washington, D.C. right now trying to organize protesters at the congressional baseball game. And they say that they are going to, quote, quote, shut it down. And their slogan on the sign says, if they don't deliver on climate, we won't let them play. Now, when I saw this, my alarm bells went off because I guess people have short memories, but I remember not long ago when an extremist, socialist, left-wing, climate crazy person came and shot up a practice for the congressional baseball game. He shot Scalise. He had to be in the hospital for quite some time, had very serious injuries. Rand Paul was there and was almost shot. The only reason there was not more carnage at that game, where you could have seen probably a couple dozen members of Congress ultimately killed, was because Steve Scalise was there and is a member of leadership. He gets a security detail. Most congressional leaders have no private security or public security. They can't even carry a gun in D.C. because the laws have been so strict. Maybe now that the court case struck down some of that, they can, but at the time they couldn't. And so there was hardly any security at this practice. And had it not been for Scalise being there and being present and having two members of security assigned to him who were able to shoot back, you could have seen a lot more carnage there. So to see these signs threatening that particular event, like, that freaked me out.
Yeah, it freaked me out too, because people just, I don't know if it's the same group, but there's these shutdown or climate rebellion or these groups that are really radical. And when I lived in DC, they used to do this thing where they would block the streets in a protest. And so you'd have miles of cars clogged up, just running fumes. And I'm like, bruh, first off, all you're doing is pissing everyone off, all the everyday people that actually work for a living, and convincing them that climate change agenda supporters are annoying and bad. And secondly, you're causing tons of emissions with this giant slowdown that you've caused. So it's super counterproductive. But they also just did like a sit-in at Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer's office to demand he reopen climate negotiations. I saw this tweet where they're like, we're putting our bodies on the line. And it's like you're sitting in an office on a plush carpet just throwing a fit. Like, I don't think that's exactly the civil rights movement. Like, you're not Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks here. But so 17 people sat in the Senate Majority Leader's office. 6 staffers were arrested afterwards, and others protested outside the building. Here's a video from a staffer about why he specifically targeted Chuck Schumer.
What exactly are you asking from Schumer that he's not doing?
To reopen the negotiations on climate reconciliation package. And that's actually passed climate legislation during the Democrats' 2 years in power.
And why protest Schumer's office and not Joe Manchin?
Because there's always going to be a sheep that strays away from the herd. It's the job of leadership to get the party together and actually pass what people need.
What exactly?
So I guess they're just like, they know that no one supports their agenda, that it's not going anywhere, and they're just resorting to like temper tantrums at this point.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that's kicked it into high gear was, and you and I were pretty stoked about this case, West Virginia versus EPA, did not go their way at the Supreme Court recently. The Supreme Court actually struck down a key protection within the Environmental Protection Agency that allowed them to heavily regulate private industry. So that's a huge power that the government just got struck down, where they were coming in and able to regulate private companies, again, without
Congress,
legislation.
without legal approval. Now they could still do it, but they would have to actually pass a bill.
Right, like actually legislate. And so I think that has kicked it into high gear. But I also think these are people who are just extremists. One of the rounds of the Tour de France was actually halted for 10 minutes this past week because half a dozen climate activists tried to stop bike riders on the road before being pulled out of the way by police. And one of them was wearing a t-shirt that said, "We have 989 days left." Like, these are people who are just not serious people. I feel bad for them. I feel like they have been significantly fear-mongered and indoctrinated, probably by government schools, into thinking that this is true. But, like, listen, again, I think climate change is an issue that we should put attention on. But this extremist, like, we only have so much time left. You guys have been saying that for 60, 70 years. And the ultimate results have never panned out. They don't even come close to being what the forewarnings are. And you just don't look like serious people anymore. And again, if you actually wanted to get things done, you wouldn't be halting bike races. You wouldn't be stopping cars and traffic, emitting emissions and fuels. You wouldn't be having this extreme left-wing agenda, which is basically a socialist Trojan horse, like the Green New Deal, and doesn't have very much to do with actual climate solutions whatsoever, but is instead this grab bag of socialist policies you're trying to shove through. I don't take you seriously. Your real agenda has nothing to do with climate. It actually has a lot more to do with a very progressive economic agenda, and climate is what you're trying to use to push it through. So I feel bad for the little, grassroots people who are being misled, but there is a larger agenda going on here, and I think that we have to call that out. And I also thought you had a really great piece on this at Base Politics this week that I actually want you to touch on. We'll link it in the show notes, but I want to reiterate that their plans here are nothing short of total lunacy. They really would make everyone poorer and hungrier and have a lower quality of life. I mean, they're going after things like air conditioning right now. They're trying to guilt trip people in the U.S. for using air conditioning in the middle of a heat wave in July. Like, these are not serious people, and they really don't care if they make the overall quality of life terrible for everybody who's currently here. They're looking for massive taxpayer spending and subsidies and regulations, and they're asking the U.S. to do this on its own. They're basically asking us to cut off our leg. And you highlighted this in the piece, but the data we have shows that it wouldn't, even if we were to do all of this and go to these crazy extremes and make our lives a living hell, it actually still wouldn't do very much at all.
Yeah, exactly. So what I did was essentially all these climate plans that they're having sit-ins over or whatever, it's unclear how much they would actually do to reduce U.S. carbon emissions. But let's say the most extreme optimistic example that if we pass this agenda, the U.S. could stop all greenhouse gas emissions tomorrow. That's so not the case. It would probably be a small fraction reduction, but let's just give them that. Even if you did that, there's this advanced statistical analysis from the Heritage Foundation where one of their analysts essentially looked at what would happen if the U.S. stopped emitting tomorrow. And they used kind of the established climate change models that like UN bodies use and that sort of thing. And they found that even if we went to zero, literally zero, which exceeds the best outcomes that these people could actually say, that the results in terms of global temperature reductions would be less than 0.2 degrees Celsius, which, because China and India are doing so much carbon emissions, China is actually building more coal plants as we speak, and they're not going to stop, really. I mean, even if our technology we were to develop all this great green technology and they were eventually to adopt it because it was more efficient or whatever, like they say it would be, that's still going to happen 30, 40 years from now. And by then it's going to be too late, according to all their models. So it's like they're actually asking us, unless you have some plan to get the whole globe on board to stop emissions, we're not going to be able to make much of a difference. So then, in my opinion, we can talk about reducing emissions through things like nuclear power. I'm all about it. But we got to start talking about adaptation. We're not all going to die because the globe gets warmer, but there'll be real challenges in some parts of this country and this world, but they can also be adapted to. People can move. Structures can be built to resist storms and rising sea levels. And there's a lot of things we could do to adapt. But the fact that even if you had the most extreme emergency, you passed AOC's wet dream of a Green New Deal, you still wouldn't stop all emissions. And if we stopped all emissions, it still would make a pretty negligible difference. To me, it just shows what a sham the whole thing is, really, and how a lot of it's a power grab and a political backdoor. I mean, AOC's former chief of staff, once admitted, this is not a conspiracy theory, once admitted on the record, yeah, the Green New Deal is really not about the climate. It's about an economic overhaul of society. And that's what it is. Yeah, I mean, I don't really have any other words for this entire scheme.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys, I want to interrupt our show briefly to talk to you about an exciting event coming up. You can join Young Americans for Liberty in Orlando, Florida for Revolution 2022. From August 4th through 6th, you and 1,000 other liberty activists will hear from the top names in the movement, including Ron Paul, Kennedy, Corey DeAngelis, Larry Reed, Brandon, A.K. Guy Herrera, Dave Smith, Michael Malice, us, as in Base Politics, and many, many more. Come experience the second annual event to learn, grow, and meet folks in the movement from around the country. Only the first 1,000 people to apply and register will have a spot at Revolution 2022. So hurry up, go to yaliberty.org/revolution to apply for a seat at the largest Liberty event of the year. Hope to see you there. All right, well, on to other poorly laid plans to combat actual emergencies. This week, Twitter has announced that it will ban the term groomer. New reporting suggests that Twitter, which was influenced by recent calls from left-wing groups, will ban the use of the word groomer as a criticism when in context of discussion of gender identity. They said, "We are committed to combating abuse motivated by hatred, prejudice, or intolerance, particularly abuse that seeks to silence the voices of those who have been historically marginalized," Twitter staffer Lauren Alexander told the Daily Dot. "For this reason, we prohibit behavior that targets individuals or groups with abuse based on their perceived membership in a protected category. Use of this term is prohibited under our hateful conduct policy when it is used as a descriptor in context of discussion of gender identity," Alexander said. So let's set the stage here for people who aren't as on Twitter as we are. This kicked off, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Brad, I believe this really kicked off with the Disney Don't Say Gay bill, right? Where they started talking about how teachers were representing themselves in the classroom, bringing up issues specifically around gender and pronouns in the classroom. Florida passed a bill that was a very badly written bill trying to give a lot more authority to clamp down on that to local districts. And there was a huge backlash from the left. What I then saw go down on Twitter was people started saying that people who thought teachers should be able to talk about these things in the classroom, people who supported this kind of instruction, education in the classroom, were quote, quote, groomers, who were essentially attempting to lay the pathway for kids to have gender dysphoria and other issues around their sexuality. Or
to molest or abuse them is the traditional implication of the word groomer. It's like preparing somebody for your abuse, and it's actually got a long context before this, and it's kind of, the term has kind of been brought into the political conversation, not just by the Don't Say Gay legislation, or so-called, in Disney, down in Florida and Disney and stuff, but it's kind of, there's this account Libs of TikTok that essentially finds viral, not even viral, it finds videos and makes them viral of left-wing teachers, academics, influencers, whatever, typically saying very outlandish things about gender, about their pronouns, about sexuality. And a lot of the videos will include like teachers who talk about pronouns or sexuality and how they discuss them with their kids in their classroom, or just how like sometimes some of the most extreme examples will have them talking about how like all kids are sexual beings, or other crazy statements that a few of these people make. And then these videos go viral, and it's kind of associated, this okay groomer, it's like a viral retort to these kind of left-wing activists pushing more extreme messages on gender and sexuality, and in some cases, you know, really involving children in it, which weirds a lot of people out, I think for understandable reasons. I personally think that the term has been overused, and that you shouldn't throw a term around lightly that implies preying on children, right? Which is one of the worst things you can do or accuse someone of. Now, in some cases, they really are grooming, right? They're doing very gross things in front of children, right? Like, or talking to children about very sexually explicit material, showing them not even borderline, but pornographic, woke children's books or other things. But in many of these other cases, it doesn't go that far, yet these words are still being thrown around. Basically, like anybody who opposes the Don't Say Gay bill, okay, groomer. And so it's become not the greatest term. I don't like how it's been overused, because I think actual grooming is like literally borderline criminal behavior. It's predatory, it's terrible. But it's kind of like when the left called everything racist, and then the term racist lost its power to call out truly bad behavior and thoughts. I think the same thing's happening now. But Twitter's decision to ban the term when used in this context is totally nonsensical and absurd. Because, I mean, so we just published a piece on this that we'll link to by Eliza Blue on Base Politics. But Twitter is language policing in a way that, as Eliza points out, will get a lot of survivors who speak out about abuse and what happened to them flagged in algorithms and potentially suspended. And also, like, Twitter is actually used to engage in grooming and criminal activity in many cases. We're not going to get into the specific details of these cases because they're very disturbing. But in this article that we'll link to, Eliza goes through multiple high-profile cases where child sexual abuse material and children themselves were groomed and abused on Twitter. And in some of the cases, Twitter didn't take it down until the government forced them to, or until they got sued. So Eliza's whole point is that it's warped priorities to be language policing at the demand of woke leftist groups when you're not even cracking down on actual criminal behavior. And I think that's a very fair criticism to make. It's kind of summed up with this funny tweet I saw from Blair White, who said, "So, we're not allowed to call anyone groomers on this app, but pedophiles are allowed to call themselves MAPs, minor attracted people. Just burn it all down at this point," she said. And the point is fair. There's actually accounts on Twitter allowed to be on there, out there pushing for basically pedophilia acceptance, a minor attracted people movement. There's even some people who want to freaking add it to the LGBTP, which I say, hell no, straight to the wood chipper for you, or to a jail cell. But those people are allowed to speak on Twitter and their terms aren't banned. But Groomer and OK Groomer are going to be banned. It's just, to me, Twitter can do whatever it wants. I do believe that, but I just think it's freaking stupid and counterproductive.
Well, that's the main thing that makes me mad about it, is it actually is extremely counterproductive. And for people who want to focus on stopping the actual abuse and trafficking of children, this is the exact opposite direction of where you should go. Because I do think there's some conservatives who started using the term groomer far too broadly, and it was losing its meaning because of that. I thought it was pretty foolish of them, and it just wasn't a good look as a whole. I don't think that necessarily talking to kids about having a husband if you're gay, or like even saying like, these are my pronouns, I don't have a huge issue with that. It's when you start trying, I've said this to people on the left for a long time, it's when you start trying to push those issues on children before they bring them up themselves, right? Like, why are you going to introduce issues with a child's gender and their sexuality before that child has even started thinking about those things? That kind of activity, I would say, I don't think I'd call it grooming, because I think, to me, grooming is specifically trying to prepare a child to be sexually exploited or abused. That is traditionally how we have legally used that term, and it would apply to people like Ghislaine Maxwell, who were roping kids in. It would apply to many of the predators Eliza calls out in her piece that were actively trying to seduce younger kids, make them think they're talking to people they're not, get illicit material from them, and then actually try to like harass and bully them and say, if you don't send me more, I'm going to release this, I'm going to tell your parents. That's all grooming, right? And we need to be really intentional with our terms. But there can still be abusive behavior, I think, in some of these conversations.
Creepy, inappropriate.
Creepy. Yes, especially by school teachers who have no business helping kids wade through sexual issues, right? This is for the families to handle, and that's just not your place at all. And I do think things like the Libs of TikTok account have highlighted that this is a problem. This is something that is happening in our schools. Is it a fringe number of people? Yes, but it is an issue, and I understand why people are disgusted by it and have an issue. So all in all, to say, that's kind of a nuanced conversation on this side. But when you start actually trying to ban groomer and say that people can't use it at all because some people are overusing it, ultimately, that hurts survivors, that hurts the ability for people to communicate within legal channels about actual crimes being carried out, and it wastes a tremendous amount of resources going after trying to police the use of the term groomer versus actually policing child pedophiles on these freaking platforms. So it's so annoying to me, and this is a major beef I have throughout almost all politics, but specifically criminal justice issues, is like when you spread our resources too thin, what you ultimately do is get people caught up in the system for things that should not be illegal, should not be banned, and that are not actually harmful to people, while the actual predators, while the actual violent perpetrators often get off because the resources are being spread too thin instead of being concentrated on the people who are actually threats and harmed. So this is what Twitter's doing. I think it's a very foolish policy. It's obviously very politically motivated because this is definitely a right on left kind of ordeal going on. So definitely check out Eliza's work, guys. We interviewed her on the show too if you want to look more into her work. She's an excellent trafficking survivor and anti-trafficking activist these days. She's an excellent resource for these conversations, and I think her piece does a really good job breaking all of this down because it's kind of a complicated issue.
Yeah, so while some people are actually working to stop groomers and stop child exploitation, like Eliza, other people are reacting to this or going out about this fight in extremely cringeworthy, counterproductive, and bizarre ways, like this viral video I just saw, where a Petsmart manager stands up to this man who comes in, and you'll be able to follow it just on the audio if you're listening, but here's the setup. And kicks him out of their store because he starts harassing an employee over the fact that they have a pretty small rainbow flag behind the cashier. Take a listen or watch to this video.
I'm just curious, what is that flag right there? That flag? What is that?
Flag? I think it's a pride flag.
Can you take it down, please, right now?
For what purpose?
Because it offends me greatly.
Can I get a manager up to the front, please?
Yeah, that stuff is satanic. We can't have that. Especially at Petsmart.
I've got a manager.
Okay. Excuse me, what is that flag right there?
It's a pride flag.
Can you take that down, please?
No, Petsmart supports belonging, which includes for LGBT.
So you support pedophilia and child sexualization? Because that's what that stands for, man.
Oh.
They're sexualizing kids with that flag, man.
Well,
So I'm very offended, and I would like it to be taken down.
well, we're gonna ask you to
Respect your
leave.
customers. Respect your customers, and please take it down for me.
We aren't going to. We are supportive of LGBTQ plus people here, so we're gonna have to ask you to leave.
Do you know what the real? That's the rainbow of Satan. The real rainbow is from God. The real rainbow is from God, man. That's the rainbow of Satan. So it's very offensive to me.
Very good. Thank you for coming by and sharing that with us. But we'll.
You don't support it, do you?
I do support it. Yes.
You support sexualization of the children?
The LGBTQ.
Do you know what they're doing to the kids, right? They're
We're asking you to leave.
They're trying to-
Please
they're-
leave.
So you're
They're,
breaking the law now because we've asked you to leave and you aren't.
they're sexualizing kids with that propaganda. It's disgusting. Our country is going downhill
Yes,
because of it.
Jamie, could I get you to the front, please?
We're asking you to leave. so
Wow, Petco sexualizes kids. They support the sexualization of kids.
try to go 'cause he's being
Wow. Yeah, this you guys are promoting the pride flag, which is satanic.
Okay, you gotta go, bud. Come on. We don't need it here. And you don't need to film me either. It's cool, but we don't need it. I mean, you want to stand outside, that's cool, but we don't need it. And
Okay.
yeah, we're gonna have the pride flag up. We have it all over our store.
Okay. So you guys support the sexualization of kids?
I'm just not gonna get into
You
it.
guys
So
support
you can-
sexualizing kids?
You can go. You can go. I can call
Shame
the
on you.
police. I can
Shame
call
on
the
you.
police. I can
Shame
call
on
the
you
police.
guys. Seriously.
Okay, that's
Shame
cool.
on you.
Thank you. I appreciate
Shame on
you.
Petco.
I appreciate it. This is Pet.
So Hannah, I think this is what right-wingers would typically call a snowflake.
I mean, I think this is like the kind of behavior that we've seen on Twitter just in real life, right? Where you're calling something grooming. He's repeatedly accusing these PetSmart employees of like believing and like pushing sexual material on kids because they have an LGBT pride flag hanging up. Like, sir, what are you talking about? He sounds like he's cracked. But yeah, and he's harassing store employees. He's making a huge scene. He's melting down because he can't stand the sight of a gay pride flag. He looks crazy.
This is a right-wing Karen. We call out
Yeah.
Karens all the time, and it's like, if you hate the flag so much, first off, you're just wrong if you're trying to say the pride flag stands for abuse of children. That is not true. 99.9% of people associated with the LGBT community or, in it would say absolutely not to that. There are different views about things like gender dysphoria in children. And these are complex medical debates, but it doesn't make them predators or anyone that supports LGBT rights and adults living their lives as somehow sympathetic to that. It's a pretty gross smear. It's got major QAnon energy. But also it's just like the entitlement here to walk into a private business. And what's funny too is he starts yelling at them about Petco and he's in a Petsmart. It's like, this dude is clearly not the brightest bulb. He's saying the wrong name of the store. And these employees and this manager, they were so polite and so calm and so reasoned. They were just explaining to him, it's their property, it's their business. They can put up a flag if they want. If you don't like it, leave. Don't fly it yourself. Don't harass them about it and then refuse to leave when they ask you to leave. He's lucky he didn't get the police called on him a lot sooner. because I think he probably should have. But it's just like the entitlement to think that you're entitled to walk around in public and everyone should never display anything that offends you. It's just so snowflakey, Karen, cringe. Yeah, I mean, I just thought the whole thing was ridiculous, but there's actually people out there like this. There's left-wing Karens, right-wing Karens. We've got a Karen epidemic in this country.
Just an important reminder that men can be Karens too, as this one was.
Oh, yeah.
They're all over. They're amongst us, and they look like normal people, and then you catch them doing this kind of thing. But no, I did love when the manager was like, he's like, I can't believe Petco stands for this. He's like, sir, this is a Petsmart. Like,
it's like, sir, this is a Wendy's.
Yeah. He's like, go to Petco if you're so offended over our flag. Yeah, he looks crazy. And I don't know. Really, people need to get a freaking grip in this country. That's all I can say about it. All right, well, let's move on to the mailbag. We had some responses to our segment last week on Jesse Lee Peterson, which is the very anti-gay, misogynist, quote-quote, YouTube pastor who has been accused of gay activity himself. And so Brad and I covered that last week, and we had some pushback. One person named Ian said, honestly, I'm surprised how quickly you believed the allegations. You both said these are allegations, but then talked as if it were true. This is not any sort fair analysis or looking at multiple sides. I don't think there's multiple sides to look at. We have his body of work, which tends to lend itself to people who end up getting caught up in these kinds of things. We have multiple people on record saying that they've either participated or seen him participate in these things. So they're allegations. We can't prove it, but do we believe them? Yeah, we do.
That's the thing. Let's be clear about what we have here. This is not an anonymously sourced hit job piece. This is 4 people on the record with their names attached that were previously in his orbit. 2 coming forward to say that they had years-long sexual relationships with him. And 2 coming forward to say that while they didn't do anything with him, he sexually propositioned them. And I believe there's actually others who say they've witnessed some of these allegations. This is a very well-sourced, reported thing. I don't know about y'all, but people don't typically just a large group of people fabricate accusations like this against somebody with all coordinated stories and verifying it to different reporters. It's like, we did say they're only accusations and they're not proven. We made that very clear. But it's safe to, I think, proceed with the assumption that it's more likely than not that this occurred. And he's barely even responded. When people bring it up, he hangs up on them. So, I mean, I'm just saying it tracks. It makes a lot of sense. This would hardly be the first time. And the way he talks about gay people is so hateful that I think it screams projection. We got other comments. Unverified information. LOL. You people are lazy. Cringe. Unwatchable content. Calling somebody else cringe. It's just funny. I mean, yeah, our content is so unwatchable that you watched our whole video, came to our channel, and then took the time to comment and let us know how unwatchable it is. And our podcast is also in the 97th percentile for podcast downloads. But okay, Wang Gang, that's his name. And you're trying to say nothing gay here, and you're
totally straight content here. I don't know. It really is a testament to how fanboy some of these online audiences get. We touched on this last week, but I think a lot of these men caught up in the web of these grifters online, they just
the alpha males.
The alpha males. They just so desperately need a man that makes them feel strong and seen, and they won't believe anything to the contrary. So sorry if that hurt your feelings, but it's pretty well-sourced information, like we said all along. Can't verify it. How could we unless we were actually in the room? But are we?
Yeah, I'm not getting in a room with Jesse Lee anytime soon.
I just saying. I don't think I meet the threshold to get into his room. Doesn't sound like
So we got some more comments on our segment from that crazy email we read last week. Go back and listen if you haven't yet. We read the craziest hate/fan mail we've ever received. This 10-paragraph email. These comments, one said, Hannah is not 35. And then they said that, mob boss wife, which is what you said you look like. I can see it. And then another person said, wow, Hannah, I thought you were a 20-something. So
nice. I don't consider that hate mail.
Oh no, these are just comments, good and bad.
Oh, got it. Okay, thanks guys.
And the other person said, is this real or did you guys make the whole thing up? And I'm just got to be honest with you, sir. We're not that creative.
Listen, I've been on some real benders in my life, but never have I ever come up with something like this. Good grief. No, even if I tried.
Mob and this guy wrote, because you had said the crazy email said that you look like a Texas congresswoman's blonde-haired Texas wife with 5 kids named Tiffany, and you said that actually I feel like I look more like a mob boss's wife from New Jersey or something. And this guy said, mob boss's wife, yeah, pretty spot on, more accurate than traditional blonde big hair Texas wife. And this other guy said, how does Tiffany find the time for this YouTube channel with her 5 kids?
I love it. I've seen several people on Twitter refer to me as Tiffany lately, and I just crack up. You guys are hilarious. And if I ever do decide to have 5 kids and marry a congressman, maybe I'll add that to my name.
Well, our YouTube videos from this podcast have been getting a lot of engagement lately. And if you comment on there, we might just read it on the show because we like to engage. But those are all the comments we got for right now.
Right. Well, it was a good week of comments, and that email was high-key funny. So go back and listen if you haven't. Now, let's move on to our hot takes. Mine's kind of policy related this week, but sometimes it takes me a minute to get hype on something. And I would say there's components of healthcare policy that healthcare policy is really complicated. This is one thing I tell everybody. I'm like, healthcare policy is so complicated. It's so convoluted by the government, its regulations. It is so far from a free market system that I've never met one person who dedicates their entire life to being a healthcare policy expert who works on the whole system. Even the experts have to take like piecemeal kind of types of subjects underneath healthcare policy to be experts on and work on because it is that complicated. And so in recent months, I've been talking to some folks about HSAs, and I didn't really get it because I've had HSAs offered in the past. I've never utilized them at companies that have offered them because, to be honest, I don't really have that many healthcare expenses. I've always had pretty good insurance. I didn't see the point. But they kept talking about how this was a really good option and would offer better personal free market kind of alternatives to healthcare. Well, recently I finally sat down with a healthcare policy wonk who we're going to have on the show soon named Dean Clancy, and he really understands this stuff. And he was helping me understand all that healthcare savings accounts offer, and I didn't know this. So you can actually reduce your income tax burden if you have an HSA because the money goes into it pre-tax. So that's one. I mean, anyway, you can keep the government from getting more of your money. Awesome. Like, what was I doing? 2, you can usually use the funds in those accounts for a more broad range of healthcare services, things that maybe traditional insurance doesn't cover. So if I get reflexology for my back pain, which I regularly do, I could possibly use my HSA to cover that, whereas insurance would just cover acupuncture, which is junk science, which is a whole other random tangent I could go off on. But it gives you a lot more possibilities there. And on top of all of that, you can use these accounts to invest. You can actually invest the funds in them in mutual funds and other stocks. And then when you retire, you can take whatever money's in there and use it for any number of other services. So it's like this great investment tax haven that I just did not conceptually understand. And now I'm desperate for one. I'm like, how do I get my hands on an HSA? But apparently only 10% of Americans can access one right now, which is high-key crazy because they're supposed to be for anybody who has a quote-unquote high-deductible insurance plan, which, let's be honest, most people do post-Obamacare because it jacked up our rates in our system, and yet the insurance companies still aren't offering them to average Americans. It's, as most things are in the healthcare system, a total crony scheme. I'm high-key mad about it. I want an HSA. You should too. And look into them more if you have the option to access one because, in my opinion, it looks like a great find if your company offers it.
Yeah, my mom has one and she makes a lot of use of it and it's really helpful. So my hot take's a little more lighthearted, but I saw some devastating news today, which is that the Choco Taco, the beloved Klondike product, which is basically like packaged ice cream in a taco-shaped cone, it has been discontinued. And people will either have no idea what I'm talking about, or they'll be like, oh, I remember that. But I remember as a kid at the pool or at the ice cream truck, they would have these Choco Tacos. And I would get them a lot, and they were so good. But it's now been discontinued. And it's if you want to have one last time, you better find one quick. Because according to CNN, they've been discontinued and canceled. They must have found their old tweets, the Choco Tacos old tweets. But I just think that this is a national travesty because the Choco Taco was an OG classic.
I've never seen this dessert in my life.
Maybe it's regional.
Yeah, it's got to be regional. I find this fascinating about the U.S. There's a lot of regional foods that people forget just how big the U.S. is, but there's a lot of foods that people eat up north or down south that other people are like, what?
Have you ever had coffee milk?
No.
Yeah, in Rhode Island where I grew up, people drink coffee flavored milk, like chocolate milk or strawberry milk, but it's coffee flavored, and they serve it in the elementary schools.
Oh wow, that sounds amazing. I did see on TikTok somebody put a like ice cream pop in their cup and then had coffee pour over it like a Keurig, and it looked great. So I have that on my list to try to make this week. Sounds really good. Kind of like a blend of hot and iced coffee. I think you'd like it. All right, guys, that's a wrap for this week. Don't forget, you have the Young Americans for Liberty Conference coming up. We hope to see you there next week. You can join our locals if you want to support the show. Leave us a comment, leave us a review. We'll likely read it on the show. We love hearing from you guys. And until next week, stay based.